Good evening. I'm Marvin Kalb, director of the Shorenstein-Barone Center on Press, Politics, and Public Policies. Members of my family there. Thank you. Thank you very much. And welcome to this forum event during which we will be discussing the future of television. This discussion is co-sponsored by the Kennedy School of Government and HBO, which recently celebrated its 20th birthday. And as I was told earlier this evening, within a year it'll be old enough to vote. Well, this afternoon we have the pleasure of hosting two seminars, one on the impact of television on our politics, on our democracy. The other seminar was devoted to the impact of television on our culture, which, because technology these days recognizes no national boundaries, is an international phenomenon and ends up being, in fact, one of America's, if not the largest, one of America's largest exports in terms of its power. I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about power, impact. Tonight we're going to mix it up, politics, culture, television, and the future. We have 7 panelists joining us tonight, and I will start from my right and go on all the way to my left in brief introductions of all of them. Russell Newman is the Edward R. Murrow Professor at Tufts and Director of the Murrow Center, an expert on the telecommunications of the future and the present. He's the author of many articles and books and a valued colleague. His first book was called The Social Impact of Television. That means he knows the answer, and we'll ask him that tonight. Tom Wicker, for 31 years a member of the New York Times, for 25 of those years a columnist on the New York Times, now retired and a fellow at the Shorenstein-Barone Center. And Mr. Wicker was kind enough to be a last-minute sit-in, fill-in for Mandy Grunwald, who was suddenly called to a meeting at the White House. I cannot imagine what kind of trouble they're having there tonight. But Mandy was asked to be there, so she couldn't be here. Reuben Blades is a singer, a songwriter, and a composer. He was born in Panama and educated there, got a Master of Laws degree here at the Harvard Law School in 1985. He's won just about every professional honor and has strong views about what television can do to and for society. Jennifer Lawson is the Executive Vice President of Programming at PBS. In one way or another, she's been involved in public broadcasting as a producer and even as a professor at Brooklyn College in the late 1970s, as I recall. She made the call on the PBS series The Civil War. That was quite a call. And what is PBS's role in shaping and defining our culture and our politics? To my left, Michael Fuchs is the head of HBO, meaning he's chairman and chief executive officer. He's a lawyer who practiced briefly before entering the world of HBO, entertainment, news, Hollywood, cable TV, Time Life. I assume that he believes in the power of television and its power to do good things. Jeff Sieganski is president of CBS Entertainment. For most of the last 20 years, he's been working for CBS or NBC, or as president of TriStar Pictures, Inc. Mr. Sieganski's decisions are crucially important in determining what we see on television and what effect it has on our society. The fact that he holds 2 Harvard degrees, one from the college and one from the business school, I assume should help him reach the right decisions. Gary David Goldberg is a writer and television producer. He was born in Brooklyn, so we shouldn't really be surprised that he produced the TV series Brooklyn Bridge and on NBC Family Ties. Sitcoms compose the tapestry of primetime television these days, and often what Mr. Goldberg and others think is what we as a nation end up seeing. Now, during our conference today, television was described in at least 2 different ways. On the one hand, it was described as mindless, lowest common denominator, sameness, a definition of mass culture. And yet television was also described as eye-opening for children who watch Sesame Street, for adults who watch the Civil War, Roots, and I think even the coverage of the Persian Gulf War. I'd like to start with the following question. At the turn of the century, 7 years from now, what will we be saying about television? Will we look back upon its performance in the last 7 years We're at the year 2000 now in this game. Will we be proud of what it's done, or will we be unhappy and disappointed? Why don't I start with Michael Fuchs?
Why would you start with Michael Fuchs?
Because you're the head of HBO, that's why.
You know, when they asked Yogi Berra to talk about the future once, he said, "You mean after today?" When I hear television, you know, those of us, we work in television day to day, and we may not see it in as grand a design as other people see it. But when I hear television discussed in these terms, I think of the ancient civilizations when they talked about the rivers. Like the Egyptians, the Nile was everything. It was their agriculture. They prayed to the Nile. It was their drinking water. It was everything. And we talk about television today, it seems, in our society at least, to emerge as almost everything. It brings us our news. It elects our presidents now. It's our culture. It's the product that we seem to be best at exporting around the world. So it's a little frightening, the power of television. So if the question is what does the future hold, I would like to stick to the high road a little bit on that. You know, I said at dinner tonight that I think of television as food. I mean, I think the public is entitled to have three-star meals and have junk food, but there's a way of making good junk food as well as three-star meals. And that I would like to think that the future of television, something that is so pervasive and so strong in our society, can be a source for education, can be a source for culture, can be more than a tabloidization of what's happening in our society, which seems to be something that we've seen happen in the last couple of years. Certainly the technology of television, and if you just look what's happened in the last 10 years, the advent of cable and the choice is quite remarkable. And I think we run the risk of the technology of television, the interfacing of television with computers and fiber optics, and we've all read the 500 channels and everything else that's coming. The technology, we run the risk of the technology sort of dehumanizing television and outstripping the content of television. As a television programmer, I would like to focus on the programming future of television, and I would like to think that this choice and diversity and this kind of increased access will allow more specialized kinds of programming, which we've seen in the last 10 years. Niche programming, some people call it. And that, yes, television feeds the mindless capability of our society, and we do have that mindless capability. But if you're discerning about what you look for on television, there are extraordinary things on television, including this panel on C-SPAN.
Thank you, Michael. Jennifer?
Well, I think that when we talk about the future of television, we're talking about a future that we have the ability to create, that we can decide what the future of television will be, and that we can start now to think about what we would want it to be. And that's why I think that forums like this are quite valuable, because I do believe that we need a new vision of the possibilities of television. I find the discussion about the technology quite exciting. I find the notion of the possibility of 500 channels or of interactions between the television set and the computer quite exciting, because I believe that it can allow us to reach new heights with television, and television for the social good. We've been talking earlier today about the role that television has played in presidential elections, and the role that television plays in a democracy, in helping citizens of a democracy be more informed. When I think about the future of television and 500 channels, I think then of that expanded role, of it being a place where the voices that we don't hear are heard loud, clear, are heard in ways that we've never heard before. And it's not just in hearing all of the groups that make up our society within our borders, but also the global society. I do think that television has already done some wonderful things to our world in connecting us to the rest of the globe in a way that we've never been connected before. and that we know that certainly the fall of the Berlin Wall, the students facing down tanks in Tiananmen Square, was very much influenced by television. Well, I think that we're at a point where with 500 channels and that kind of expansion, that we can then have a greater connection between other societies in other parts of the world, but not simply by exporting our culture abroad to them, but having ways, using some of those channels to be ways in which we can learn more about other parts of the world, other cultures, before it all becomes homogenized. I think that there's that assimilation and homogenization are sort of natural processes over time. And that, but before that happens, that we really should mine the richness of our own culture and the cultures around the world, and that an expansion of television technology can help us do that.
Very optimistic so far. Ruben?
I'm going to be very brief because she addressed the issue. I think that the future of television is going to be defined by the type of society we evolved into. I think it's a wonderful thing that we're going to have all the choices in terms of channels, et cetera, that we're going to be able to understand the world better. We're going to have the opportunity to choose from a tremendous variety of programs. The question is whether people are going to see these programs, whether we're going to be able to understand what we're seeing. I think that we risk becoming the best informed society that ever died of ignorance, because we have a tremendous amount of choices which we do not take. I think that the future is going to be determined by the quality of leadership that we have abroad, by the return of a certain amount of respect for intellectual ability and capacity. Whether that is going to happen or not, I don't know. But I don't think we should be blaming an object. I think we should be looking at ourselves and saying, you know, why are people looking at mindless things as opposed to be looking at something else? And the question, I guess, will have to go to the reason of the disintegration of respect towards the intellectual achievement that we're witnessing today. I would think that at some point in this country, for instance, there would be a moment where there would be a celebration of all the Nobel Prizes that in this country. Get them all together. Not just all the sports people and all the singers and get all the Nobel Prize people together. Have them celebrate their achievements. I think that if we really are thinking about the future of television in terms of intellectual possibilities, I think we should try to begin to recognize the importance of intellectual process now. But I don't think that it would be fair to, at this point, to say that in the future, if people choose to see, you know, my friend the Petit Pois, then they're like silly, because they should be watching the Maya civilization on channel 432. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that things are changing at such a rapid pace that the other day I read that the Guatemalan armed forces are trying to get a channel of their own, which is a very distressing possibility. What would happen if all of a sudden fascism becomes a hit? It's all really going to depend upon, again, where does our society evolve towards? Are we going to be prepared for the challenges? And I think the answer will be given by the future, what kind of society we end up.
Jeff Sieganski, do you see a program over the next 7 years at CBS that will be devoted to the convening of all of the Nobel Prize winners, and try to slip that into your general comments about disappointment or exhilaration about television?
The answer to the first one is no, but I think in 7 years, I think Amy Fisher will be released from prison. And there won't be 3 movies, there'll be 500 movies that will deal with this release. You know, I think that in 7 years, we're going to be sitting here, and a lot of us will be saying, gee, there are 500 channels, how come there's nothing to watch? And I think that, you know, the fact of the matter is that TV can only fill a certain void in people's lives, and I think there's no way that TV can ever live up to the expectation that people put in it, because just like any art and literature, there's only so much that really touches the soul and inspires and moves and makes you sort of reflect on your relationship with other people. And when TV is at its best, it does that. And again, though, like in art and literature, it only happens very occasionally, and it's not for lack of trying, it's for the fact that there are very few great artists in our world. And I think we're going to be having the same discussion. This will be an ongoing discussion. As long as television's around, there'll be the argument of whether it's fulfilling its use or not, and what people expect of it. And I don't think it ever will, even though I think as technology progresses, there's going to be a great deal more shows and programs and capabilities that television is going to bring into our daily life.
Thank you, Jeff. Tom Wicker?
Well, I don't think I quite agree that we have the power to shape this instrument as we wish, as was said in the beginning, because it seems to me that instrument also shapes us, and there's an interreaction here. We heard this afternoon about how many hours people watch TV and the extent to which it's a passive activity that one is receiving, and I think there's an interchange here. As television changes us in ways that we don't fully understand, then we feed back into television, and perhaps it changes there, and there's a continuous process here. So I'm not at all convinced that we can just simply decide intellectually, or that Harvard University or the government or anyone can just decide, well, we're going to have a good medium rather than a junky medium or mindless medium, and that it will then follow. I don't think that will happen. And as for the contention that it will depend on the kind of society that we evolve, that is certainly true, but the kind of society that we evolve depends to a great extent on television, on the television that we have now, not 7 years from now. And I'm here tonight primarily to talk about the impact of television on politics, which was Mandy Grunwald's assignment. And I think if you look out, perhaps not 7 years, but not too far in the future, there are two things that I believe we'll see in the political arena because of television. In the first place, I think we're very far along the road towards, and we'll get there sooner rather than later, towards what Ross Perot called the electronic town meeting. That we're going to have, perhaps by the year 2000, we're going to have a system by which when the president, whoever he or she may be, proposes that gays should be enlisted in the military without prejudice, then I think you'll be able to get somewhere in the order of 240 million responses overnight on this. And if it comes out pretty overwhelmingly one way, as I think it would, then it would be a bold president who would fly in the face of that. So I think we're going to get that, and I'm not sure, I don't see exactly how what we think of as representative democracy, in which we have a government that sometimes tries to do good things. I don't see how representative democracy ultimately can survive the electronic town meeting. And we already have in polls, we already have a very primitive form of that, and we know to what extent now polls influence the activities of government. So what will it be when you don't have just scientific samples, but you have actually, say, 250 million responses? That's one thing, I think. And the other thing is much more speculative on my part, and that is that I believe we are already, and that perhaps by the year 2000 we will see that we are in an era of one-term presidencies, primarily because of television. And I don't mean to imply that we won't have in the future some Franklin Roosevelt or Ronald Reagan who can win 2 terms because he or she would be an extraordinary personality. But I think that president in and president out, so forth, we see too much of these people. And we're going to get tired of it. And I think not the least reason that we have a new president now is because we got tired of the old one. We got tired of them for a lot of reasons, but television was one of them. And I think it's not unusual to think that after something's been on the air 4 or 5 or 6 seasons, you want to change it. And in my judgment, we see presidents practically 24 hours a day now with CNN, C-SPAN. We see them every night on the nightly news. We see presidents in every shape. We see them throwing up on the dining table in China. We see them practically fainting in a road race in Maryland. We see presidents in all sorts of ways. We're far more familiar with the president than we are with the mayor, wherever it is that you live, because the president is there all the time on your screen. I think we get tired of it. And after about 4 years, we say, let's change it. Not necessarily change to a better one, but just a different one. I'm quite serious about that, and I believe that the intense familiarity that television gives us with the president, whoever he or she is a signal political factor that we are only just beginning, if we are even beginning to realize, and we'll perhaps by the year 2000 we'll see it more clearly.
Thank you, Tom. Gary David Goldberg, your view.
I think the networks left alone would put on live executions. All 3 except for the Fox network, which would put on naked live executions. And I don't actually know that this is going to get better. And I think the thing that's going to amaze you tonight is just what a decent and smart and really lovely man Jeff Sieganski is. You know, honest to God, he's really a good friend. And yet, the question that was raised today by Professor Gitlin, I think, really goes to the point of this, which is, what is the relationship between network television and culture? And the answer is none. None. Network television exists for one reason: to deliver audiences for sponsors' message. There's no other reason for it to exist. If anything else comes out of it, that's interesting and an interesting sidelight and something that has to be dealt with. But to the extent that you engage the television viewing audience too vehemently and do not make them really passively aware and available to audience, to advertising messages, you get into a very dangerous area. When you say, what is Jeff Sieganski's job to put on quality television, it isn't, because he can't keep his job if he does that. And the 2 shows that won the Viewers for Quality Television Award last year, Brooklyn Bridge and I'll Fly Away, the chances of them both being on network television in the fall are 1 billion to 1. So I think, as I try to work through this for myself, what I'm going to be doing in 7 years, and if I'm going to be writing anything for 7 years, I try to put myself in Jeff Sieganski's place. I don't know what I would do differently if that was my job, because his job is not to be Viewers for Quality Television Man of the Year. It's to deliver audiences for advertising messages. And until somehow that distinction is straightened out one way or the other, I think television will be what it's always been, all things that have been mentioned here. It's always been, in the 15 years that I've been involved, the best of times and the worst of times. There have been really interesting, exciting shows and some horrendous shows, some truly insulting shows. I have a 9-year-old daughter whose favorite television show is The Mary Tyler Moore Show, because it's on Nickelodeon, which is actually my favorite television network next to HBO, and is a network that has a niche which is basically to empower kids. And I have a 9-year-old daughter who feels better about herself when she puts that channel on, and you cannot believe what she did to get her vote in when they asked her to vote for president. And it was all, I have to vote, Dad, I gotta vote, get me to a phone. They're counting on me, you know? So that's what it's always been. You also have to take with a grain of salt, I am a wounded man. My show hanging in the balance here, you know. So you have
didn't help yourself.
Yeah, you know, you gotta take what I say with a grain of salt, because my credibility may be damaged by that. But it's hard, because on the one hand, Jeff Sieganski gave me a creative freedom. Maybe we should just go somewhere and talk about this. You know, that I had never before had in television. On the other hand, he can say, this is a show that I love, that I respect, that I think is wonderful, but I really don't think it's going to be on CBS in the fall, and that's kind of this gray area where we live now.
Thank you very much, Gary. Russell Newman.
I love to go last. with all due respect for my distinguished panelists, you guys all got it wrong. It's not going to be television. I mean, using a word like television would be using an awkward word like a horseless carriage. When television goes two-way and the delivery medium, both through terrestrial broadcasting as a digital medium and through the fiber optics that will replace the twisted pair cable that is now your telephone line and replaces in fiber optics the coaxial cable that now delivers you one-way multi-channel television. My fellow panelists have been using the number 500 for 500 channels. They have been reading Time Warner press releases. The number of channels becomes completely meaningless in the year 2000 because you've got as many channels as you want. You want to watch a particular episode of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, you call it up. Television will really be in your control. And what HBO will become and what CBS will become is a producer of interesting programming which you can now either watch with advertising support and then pay some small premium because as a two-way medium you can pay for it. Or if there is a very small audience that wants to see Portuguese programming or 19th century Italian opera, by paying a premium, if it's worth it to them, they can order that up and it will be, if they can bring the cost of production down, an economically viable thing to deliver. So the premise that television is advertising supported, that it is built around a network and network decisions that have the mass economics, will be wonderful historical anecdotes that bearded professionals on this panel 7 years now will talk about. But the reality of television will be it'll be an entirely new medium by going two-way, by moving away from the network economics. It will no longer be the medium we have known as television.
Wow. What a beginning. When are you leaving your job, Jeff? Michael, your job is finished also? Or is it cable? Is cable going to be okay?
It's going to be fiber optics.
Fiber optics.
And at 8 o'clock...
Will there be an HBO in 7 years?
Yes, there will. And it will produce programming. And instead of ordering per channel, you'll order what program you want. And you can either order it with finally, there'll be advertising on HBO. And if I want to pay $2 for the program, I'll see it with advertising. And if I want to pay $4 for the program, I'll see it without. My choice.
What's Goldberg going to be doing? He was very worried. He's got a 9-year-old child.
He's going to be selling the Brooklyn Bridge.
To whom? To whom?
The highest bidder.
What would, if in fact you could produce programming and you understand that the cost per viewer has to go to $20 if you've got 20,000 viewers instead of 2 million or 20 million viewers, understand now that you don't have a window of twice a year, once in the fall and once in reruns in the spring. And you've got originally the concept that the only way to produce a program is at $1 million, $1.25 million an hour. Now you can produce a program at $300,000 an hour or $100,000 an hour if you want, and work out the whole economics for getting some ideas you want to produce, you can produce at $100,000 an hour. And now it's economically viable, and you don't have that critical mass minimum that CBS will, for as long as it exists as a one-way network, require you to have. What will you do?
I'd still stay with Jeff. No, I think that's going to be great. I think already you start to see a really change in our economics as they exist now. In order to bring Brooklyn Bridge back even for a second year, we all had to take salary cuts. People had to forego raises. We did the show for about 30% less than we did it the first year. I think there's a tremendous appetite among people in my position to only be concerned with the process and really just, if we could control the process, then the economics of it would be wildly less important.
Michael Fuchs, if Professor Newman is right, there is some banana peel under your foot in another couple of years, or do you see it differently?
I mean, the good news is diversity, the bad news is we have no jobs. I would like to ask Russell a question. What does it cost to have this magnificent plant in place in America in the next 7 years? Because when I was in law school, I read about the wired nation and video on demand, and unfortunately that was over 20 years ago. And although you said it was my company that issued the press release about 500 channels, it was John Malone's company. We issued a press release about the superhighway, which goes beyond television programming, which goes into telephony and every other kind of interactivity. but as a plain old country programmer, I'd like to know what I'd like to know what all of this hardware is going to cost. And 7 years for this kind of technological adjustment is a short time frame.
It costs to wire the average coaxial cable connection in urban and suburban areas about $500. That's the cost of the head end and the coax. But if you want to buy a cable system, you're going to pay somewhere around $2,500 for that $500 piece of equipment. The extra value, and the reason it costs you that much to buy it, is that coaxial cable is a monopoly. And the cash flows derived from that monopoly generate enough to generate that cost per subscriber. What's going to happen is there's going to be a competition, an all-out fight between the telephone company that wants to deliver you television and a coaxial company that doesn't want the competition and says, if you're going to deliver television, I'm going to deliver telephony, and they will. And since neither one's going to give up, it doesn't matter how much it costs because there's a cash flow to support upgrading 1 unit at a time. In fact, the Time Warner release did talk about gradually upgrading and taking the cash flow in Queens from first 500 homes, first 1,500 homes, and then 1,000, then 500, and pay-per-view television to bring in telephony in Orlando and in Queens. And so with both companies doing it...
What's the aggregate cost? Not per home, but with America's telecommunications plan today, to get to video on demand, which is what you're talking about, how many tens of billions of dollars will be invested?
I'm only a country professor. But the estimate from my colleague, Professor Marvin Serbu at Carnegie Mellon Institute, is that it'll cost $200 million for the nation as a whole to put in one line of switched fiber, presuming it's the telephone company that does it. $200 million.
So that your entire projection is based on an assumption that this money somehow is going to materialize and be devoted to this project, right?
It'll cost us $200 million in Orlando, $200 million in the nation?
500 billion? Well, that's a good figure, 500 billion. Jeff Sieganski, can you afford 500 billion at CBS?
We can't even afford Brooklyn Bridge.
Jennifer Lawson, what happens at PBS, which of course is dependent upon money coming in from various private corporations and from the U.S. government in various ways? When you listen to Professor Newman, do you share that sense of what the future is going to hold?
I share some of Professor Newman's sense of what the future is going to hold. And that's something that we are in public television are already beginning to experiment with. WGBH right here in Boston is already working with an interactive student magazine, for example, where they use by connecting television sets to computers, students in different locations around the country can actually create a magazine together live in real time, so that there are some experiments already underway within public television along those lines, assuming that at some point in history, whether it's 7 years or farther out in the future, we will have that kind of interaction. My concern is a different one, though, about this, that assuming that does come to pass. The most disturbing thing for me about the analysis that Professor Newman presents is the one that it will all be based upon a market need. And that the assumption then that if you want then to receive this program, you can pay for it and that you'll be able to get that as a video on demand. And so it begins to assume for me that all our media needs are ones that we can acquire through the marketplace in that way. And I worry and wonder then about the public service side of it, about what happens for the people who cannot afford to pay.
That's right.
What public television right now serves people who cannot afford cable or who have chosen not to subscribe to cable. And what happens to the needs that we have that are needs that don't make sense in a marketplace.
But what in fact will happen in your view?
Well, I think, and that's where I do go back to what I was saying earlier about I do believe that we make that choice, that we can have the ability to create that future in a sense by our choices. I do believe that public television and citizens, as we are gathered here, must create a vision of non-commercial services, telecommunication services, and now I'm not talking exclusively about public television as it exists, but we must, as we look out at this new landscape of telecommunications possibilities, that we must create a vision of what our needs are, what our non-commercial needs are, what our education needs are that can be served by that technology, and try to build that into the creation of new systems.
But you're now, excuse me.
I was just going to say that it plays a tremendous role, for example, when we talk about technology like this, think of its advantage for education. We are already using it. There are public television stations now that use satellite technology to provide a teacher for a subject in rural school districts where they cannot afford to teach that subject. So if in rural Kentucky there's one kid who wants to take calculus, but there's no teacher, we have a satellite consortium where the teacher can be in New Jersey, the students can connect to each other in that way. What happens to needs and services like that?
Ruben Blades, Jennifer Lawson is talking about technological possibilities, and Russ Newman seems to be projecting technological certainties. In your view, which is the more accurate of the two, and why?
Again, it would be a matter, a decision that would have to be made outside the realm of economics. What she is referring to, I would find more important to keep. But what the gentleman was saying before continues to be true. I mean, it will continue to be true 7 years down the line. What you're selling a space based on X amount of dollars that are going to be provided by sponsors, et cetera, et cetera. That's one area. Now, what she's addressing is the need, if I understood you correctly, that all of us create the means to support television as a public service medium as well, providing the type of services that you were mentioning just a second ago. If I had to, I mean, I don't see how you can reconcile both. Maybe it could be that, again, we all, in order to save the possibility of television as a public service medium, chip in and maintain these PBS's stations afloat while trying to serve our other needs or selfish interests by acquiring services that the gentleman was referring to prior. But if I had to choose between the both, I would go with the need for a public service.
Let's talk money for a second. Jeff Sieganski.
Yeah, I think...
No, wait a minute.
Yeah, go.
Well, go ahead.
No, I think
I have a specific question, but go ahead.
I think that the technology that Professor Newman talks about, I think it in fact will be available, but I think that it's not going to come to pass as he's talking about for two reasons. One, because I don't think that with all the other priorities that this country has, that the top priority is going to be to cable in the way that he's talking about every single household. But I think more important is what is the structure of the industry? How does the industry, the chaotic kind of industry that Professor Newman talks about, how do you get enough people inspired to order a show? How does a show get ordered? How does a show get marketed? There are 5,000 different choices. How does one decide what's going to get made? Does one subscribe a year and ahead? Because that's not the way it works now. And is there any then cultural shared experience in this country, which is what basically network television has been providing, and television in general has been providing for this country? I really look at it as sort of the cultural glue that's certainly held the democracy together since the war, both culturally and in terms of informing people in terms of political choices.
There's a television critic in a tufted chair with an English accent on PBS who tells you what to watch. Imagine what you want. Maybe your interest is in foreign films, or it's in Asian films, or in old television. You dial up, and there is a menu that and you can talk back and forth with people who know those films well, and say, well, what do you want to watch? I want a comedy from the 50s, maybe a musical. Well, here's 15 to choose from.
But what you're talking about, though, is actually just bringing the video store into the home.
Yeah, we have that already.
That's already there. You can do that now now you can't dial it up on your phone, but you can walk down to all the 15,000 video stores in this country, and you can take out whatever you want. I don't think that is the future of television, just bringing the video store into the home. I think there's still going to be made-for-television product that people want to see, that's going to inform people, inspire them, as it's been doing for 40 years.
I want to move ahead to the issue of money. Well, maybe that's moving back. You started out facetiously, obviously, saying that within 7 years there are going to be 500 Amy Fisher movies. At NBC, the senior vice president for movies, a woman named Ruth Lawson, was quoted by the New York Times as saying, "I think it's a really sad commentary about what people are interested in. We all say we don't want to keep on doing these true crime movies, but then these numbers come in," I assume she's talking about ratings, "and what choice do we have?" What do you think she means by what choice do we have? I mean, ever since from Genesis, we've had a choice. What choice do we have? Any kind of choice. I mean, the kind of choice that Professor Newman's talking about. Why do we end up with Amy Fishers?
Well, look, that's a good question. The fact of the matter is that when I started in this business, which was only 15 years ago, there were 6 channels that people had to choose from. 15 years later, on the average box, there's about 35 channels. Now, they're not all doing Amy Fisher movies. The 3 networks did the Amy Fisher movie, and I'm not going to say that was my proudest moment in the television business, because it wasn't.
But why did you do it?
Why did we do it?
Yeah.
I thought it was going to get a rating, and I thought it was going to be something that people were interested in, and they were interested in it. It was, the one that we did was not particularly exemplary. It was awful, but we didn't set out to make something awful. And I'll tell you that the same person that decided, gee, why don't we make the Amy Fisher movie is the same group of people that decided to make Lonesome Dove or Queen that's on this week. I mean, there are highs and lows. There are highs and lows in every artistic field in this country. But I think that the whole move of technology, which I think is a good one, is how does Gary Goldberg, who has a show on that doesn't do enough, we can't charge the advertisers enough to support that show. How does he take that show and, with technology, go out? Because if everybody that watched Brooklyn Bridge paid 50 cents to watch it, it would be a viable show. And I think that's what the technology that you're talking about is capable of doing. But on the other hand, people have to know that there's the Brooklyn Bridge on, and they want to watch it, and how does it get marketed, how does it get sold? And it's not going to get sold with 5,000 different channels and no network. I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Jennifer, if a major American corporation came to you about 6 months before the explosion of Amy Fisher and said, "We will give you $5 million to do a movie on Amy Fisher," would PBS take the $5 million and do the movie on Amy Fisher?
No.
You would not?
No, we would not.
Why?
We would not. We would not because...
$5 million.
I hear you. I hear you. I hear the $5 million, but we would not do it because we would not see it as fitting in with our principles and within our mission in educating and enlightening the public. And we would not see that as being material that would provide that.
Ruben?
That's what I meant before. I was thinking of banana peel. Long time ago. I mean, one huge banana peel. I have to say it, otherwise I won't be able to sleep tonight. What if we find out that electromagnetic fields are harming people coming from television, and it would be the end of TV as we know it. Now I've said it. Okay. Now, but what I wanted to say was what she was referring to. What she was referring to is exactly the point I was trying to make before, in that she will say no to $5 million because there is a principle there is a direction that they choose to follow. Then the priority is not the money. On the other hand, I must say that I do find it very hypocritical to criticize somebody like, for instance, Geraldo Rivera comes forward with a show about the Al Capone vault, I don't know what. People watch the show acquires a tremendous rating, right?
It wasn't on CBS.
No. And aren't you sorry? Because it was a very highly rated show. And no offense meant. But the point is, no offense meant. But the point is, though, that it had a tremendous rating, and then there is a panel of sorts, and then they ask people, well, what do you think? Oh, it's a terrible show. I mean, I would have never done that. Yeah, but it had the biggest rating. So who's to blame here? People? Because they're stupid enough to be enticed to watch the opening of the Al Capone vault? Or what? You know.
Jerry?
No, I think there's a kind of a Gresham's Law effect here, and since I'm in college, I thought I'd mention Gresham's Law. So, does anybody know what Gresham's Law actually is? It used to be like the bad money pushed out the good money. And I think that basically Gresham's Law is at work in the television business in that we have for too long kind of diminished our own worth with a large segment of the audience. So people no longer think of ABC, NBC, CBS as places that they will tune in to become engaged and really where they will get in any kind of in-depth experience of what they're watching, as a rule, you know. And so these people are no longer even available to the networks because we have trivialized our culture so much that we've just turned these people off. And unfortunately, these are the people who watch Brooklyn Bridge, and they don't watch other shows on network television as a rule, and they're very hard for us to reach. But see, I think we do. I think there should be something that CBS won't put on. There is something that PBS won't put on. I don't think you can say, well, the show did well, and I'm going to go home and it was a great night. You know, we had good ratings. Because I think that putting those 3 shows on diminished us as a culture. And I don't think we can get that back.
How can you say that if so many people watched?
Yeah.
Because, well, why would I say it? Because I don't.
How can you say it?
Well, we have, why? Because that's like saying, how can we have standards? There are rules for people to graduate from Harvard University or any university. There's something that we should be willing to say as a culture is part of our mandate, what we want to examine. Is it necessary for every household in America to have been subjected to those commercials and those promotions to have? Would you let your daughter, by any stretch of the imagination, watch a day of NBC programming? I would just as soon give her poison. I mean, you can't do that.
Let me.
Go ahead.
I want to go back to something that, because everyone attacks the networks and what we're doing to television or whatever, and something Tom Wicker said, and it's like a chicken and egg situation, and that is that television, yes, influences society, but our audiences influence us. Mm-hmm. And if you've been in this business long enough, and we can't blame this only on television, I feel a cumulative drop in the IQ of our audience. There's a drop in the concentration span in this country. Now, you can blame it on media like we blame everything else in this country on media. But we do respond. I mean, I don't believe quite, I don't go so far as to say, as the British used to say, the Irish love potatoes, so that's why they live on potatoes. They didn't give them a chance to eat anything else. But we do give to our audience what we think they're going to watch. And I do think we have an obligation. I don't want the wired, or I don't want the electronic town meeting. I think that is an incredibly dangerous thing, and I don't want to know exactly what my audience wants because I know what they want. They're going to want Arnold Schwarzenegger, and they're going to want violence, and they're going to want Amy Fisher, and I think it is our job. I have a different job than Jeff. I don't have sponsors. I put things on the air that he cannot put on the air, as brave and as intellectual as he wants to be, and I put them on the air because no one else puts them on the air, and that's the role we've chosen for ourselves. That's our niche. But you have sponsors in this country who will not deal with controversial subjects. Major American corporations who act like abortion is not an issue in this country or that AIDS is not an issue. And you also have an audience that likes to watch Geraldo Rivera shine a flashlight into a vault. So it isn't, you know, it's great up here to say that we are all jerks, those of us who program networks, and that, you know, we appeal to the lowest common denominator, but And I think Reuben said something earlier. He said, we're going to be the best informed society that dies of ignorance. I mean, we don't get it back from the audience that they want to be challenged or provoked. And yes, it's a very easy decision for a CBS guy to go with Amy Fisher, because it'll beat the pants off going with Joseph Stalin. I can tell you that. You know, we make television programs for the networks now, and we put on a show. We put on a movie called Running Mates with Diane Keaton and Ed Harris, and you'd think it was written for the Clinton campaign. It's about he gets engaged to Diane Keaton and finds out there's something in her past and has to do with media, and it was a sort of two great actors, an intelligent script, and a good movie. And our other division makes a movie about Carolyn Warmus, which is a murder case out of Westchester that two networks did. Our night, unfortunately, we go up against CBS. Our own movie beats us because it's Carolyn Warmus. So someone at Time Warner probably should have said to me, "Why don't you put that movie on HBO?" So you know, what is happening in our society. We may influence what people want to watch and what has become of our society and its concentration span. But it's happening out there, and that feedback, that's our instinct, that's what we feed off of, is sometimes crimps our ambitiousness, makes us fearful of programming over the heads of our audience. That is becoming a problem in this country.
And yet throughout 1992 and the entire election campaign, what we heard this afternoon was that there was a lot more that the American people wanted from television than what it is that they were in fact provided. That there was a tremendous appetite for information, for hard, serious discourse on the major problems facing the country. That came up both in the discussion of our politics and the discussion of culture. So we seem to have some kind of confusion or conflict here between what it is that you are saying that you follow when you try to get to the American people and what the American people seem to be saying in the 92 campaign.
Yeah, that's like research. We send out research, and everyone wants to watch documentaries. You put documentaries on the air, and nobody watches them.
I remember. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got 4 microphones set up, 2 in the balconies and 2 down here. If you'd like to ask a question, you're more than welcome to. Go to the microphone, and when you ask your question, please give us your name, and if you're a student here at the university or in whatever way you spend your time. Right here, if you'd like to start.
My name is Joseph Carvin. I'm at the Kennedy School of Government. And I want to ask about, the gentleman from CBS talked about the fact that television...
Excuse me one sec. Can you all hear him? Yes, okay.
The fact that television has provided a common culture and reached out across America. And to a great extent, that common culture revolves around violence and the amount of violence on TV. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the self-restraint that the networks are applying in terms of the use of violence on TV, particularly for young adults and young children.
Yeah, I will. Actually, this is an issue which I think is going to be increasingly at the forefront of the debate on television in the next couple of years. And one thing that we're doing for the first time, and I guess the amazing part about it is the first time, and that is that during the summer, we're going to invite all the producers that are doing shows for us to come to a symposium, and we're going to have experts that have done research on violence, the effects of violence on families, on children, on just the general, whatever research is available, as well as people from the public life, politicians, and they're going to talk about what they know are the effects as far as they can determine, and hopefully this is going to start to sensitize some of the producers, because in the end, we're relying on the good taste and the judgment of the producers that we hire. We don't write the shows, we order the shows, and it's up to them to produce them. And, I think the fact of the matter is that there is an incredible amount of research that supports the fact that there's way too much violence on television. And I think all 3 networks, are going to do something about it. And I think it's not out of self-interest. It's out of the fact that if we don't do it, it's going to be regulated. And I think every time regulation becomes a factor in this country, it doesn't work. So we're aware of it.
Thank you very much. Question from the balcony, please.
I'm Emily Brodsky. I'm a student here at Harvard, and I've been working with a group of students starting a student television production organization. And I wanted to ask Mr. Fuchs, you spoke in the beginning about rehumanizing the media. And as a small production group, we seem to be the ideal way to do that. But where do you go from here? How do you go about it?
Who would you like to try to answer that question?
I'm not sure I understand. I talked about technology dehumanizing television. But your question is?
More as a local programming group, we have an opportunity, since we know our audience so well, we can try to go above the technology and rehumanize the media.
Rehumanize, I see. And you're saying, what's your next step?
Right.
Well, I presume you mean, how do you move from a local operation to?
Well, how would a local production operation? I mean, we work through public access and through just putting a videotape on. And how do you address a local audience?
How do you, well, I don't know, I'm going to try to answer your question, meaning how would you go from just doing local television to having more impact? How do you, I'm not an expert on how to address a local audience because I'm part of a national programming service, but I can tell you one thing, that the television is so competitive now. The search for talent, someone said earlier tonight that they had dinner with the Harvard Lampoon people are over there, and all of them have been signed already to Hollywood situations. There's no such thing if you're good, it doesn't matter if you're local. Everyone, we had on Comedy Central, we had a program that took local access tapes and made a program out of it. So, you know, no one's talked much about the appetite of television here. I mean, it's an old cliche already that television consumes so much and spits it out. It's on one day gone. So if you're good and your people are good and you're looking for a bigger arena, you'll be discovered. I mean, this is as aggressive a talent scouting industry as anything that exists in our country. And if you're rehumanizing, all the better.
Gentleman here to the right.
My name is Dr. Franklin Nussbaum. I write as an avocation, but I'm also a consumer of entertainment, like we all are. I have a phrase that I wrote down here. You are to influence them, not let them influence you. And as a consumer, I'd like to feel that I can do that. A perfect example is Mr. Goldberg and Jeff. A very finely written program. That program is full of love and all the tender things of life. And I understand the mechanics and the problems of network television. Why couldn't there, Jeff, be a consumers group, an arm of CBS, who recognizes, for instance, a special program that came along as an ensemble and everything? Why couldn't that group, with the blessings of CBS and the help of CBS, to go out to those areas where the reports aren't that good far as standards, and really exert that you have some passion about? Because if you recognize something good, it's worth trying to fight for. I'm sure the network does, but they're consumers.
We got the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dad. Glad you were able to get that in. No, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to hear you say that, and to know that it's something that we do that would have that kind of impact on you, and that you would stand up and say something as generous and as thoughtful as that. The fact is that is always the double edge of television. We have received more mail on Brooklyn Bridge from people than probably anything done before. Jeff Sieganski actually called people, and said, the depth of it. Unfortunately, right now, network television has no other way to measure success or failure than number of bodies in front of the set. They don't measure intensity. We have no way to translate that into economic gain. And that's what needs to be done for that to become an equation. But I just want to take one. I'm a little disturbed by the fact that we are saying that there's no standards, the fact that people will watch Geraldo open a vault. If Geraldo was making racist, sexist, misogynist statements while he was opening that vault and people watched it, is that still something that we should be putting on? Where's the line? I mean, where is the line of the diminution of our culture? I don't think you can say our job is not just to pander. It can't be just to pander. There has to be another element to this equation.
There was never the intention to say that it should pander. The question remains that there seems to be a discussion going on amongst the industry types about shows like that, but at the same time, then the rationale behind the show's existence is that it delivers ratings. And the question is then, what goes first?
Well, pornography might deliver ratings too, but we're not going to put that on. My problem with network television as it's now, we've become the National Enquirer. We're the goddamn Globe and Star. We don't aspire to anything else. This is what we're putting out every day, and there's a certain segment of the people who are buying it, and now we're saying, well, that's everything we want. We just want people just want to buy the National Enquirer.
But Gary, just to take exception, and that is, the same system.
Gentleman here to the right.
My name is Dr. Franklin Nussbaum. I write as an avocation, but I'm also a consumer of entertainment like we all are. I have a phrase that I wrote down here. You are to influence them, not let them influence you. And as a consumer, I'd like to feel that I can do that. A perfect example is Mr. Goldberg and Jeff, a very finely written program. That program was full of love and all the tender things of life. And they understand the mechanics and the problems of network television. Why couldn't there, Jeff, be a consumers group, an arm of CBS, who recognizes, for instance, a special program that came along as an ensemble and everything? Why couldn't that group, with the blessings of CBS and with the help of CBS, to go out to those areas where the reports aren't that good far as standings, and really exert so that you have some passion about, because if you recognize something good, it's worth trying to fight for, and I'm sure the network does, but there are consumers too,
Okay,
and that's what we are.
We got the question. Thank you
Gotcha.
very much, Doug. Jeff?
Thank you, Dad. Glad you were able to get that in. No, you see, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to hear you say that, and to know that that's something that we do would have that kind of impact on you, and that you would stand up and say something as generous and as thoughtful as that. The fact is that is always the double edge of television. We have received more mail on Brooklyn Bridge from people than probably anything done before. Jeff Sieganski actually called people, and said, what about, and the depth of it. Unfortunately, right now, network television has no other way to measure success or failure than number of bodies in front of the set. They don't measure intensity. We have no way to translate that into economic gain. And that's what needs to be done for that to become an equation. But I just want to take one. I'm a little disturbed by the fact that we are saying that there's no standards, that the fact that people will watch Geraldo open a vault. If Geraldo was making racist, sexist, misogynist statements while he was opening that vault and people watched it, is that still something that we should be putting on? Where's the line? I mean, where's the line on the diminution of our culture? I don't think you can say our job is not just to pander. It can't be just to pander. There has to be another element to this equation,
There was never the intention to say that it should pander. The question remains that there seems to be a discussion going on amongst the industry types about shows like that, but at the same time, then the rationale behind the show's existence is that it delivers ratings. And the question is then, what goes first?
Well, pornography might deliver ratings too, but we're not going to put that on. My problem with network television as it is now, we've become the National Enquirer. We're the goddamn globe and the star, and we don't aspire to anything else. This is what we're putting out every day, and there's a certain segment of the people who are buying it, and now we're saying, well, that's everything we want. We just want people just want to buy the National Enquirer.
But Gary, just to take exception, and that is, the same system that put on Brooklyn Bridge and that can't sustain it is sustaining picket fences, Northern Exposure, Wonder Years, Murphy Brown, and a lot of other, great shows. So yeah, there seems to be two sides to the equation. There is this sort of exploitation programming, which has always been a part of television for as long as I can remember, and then there's also the quality, and I don't look down on the audience. I think the audience knows when there's something great, and they come to watch it by and large. My whole experience has been if you hang with something that's good, eventually they'll come. Now this is an example where we've been hanging with something, they haven't come yet. I'm still hoping they come. But the fact of the matter is I think the audience is there for good things. I think they're so unusual and they're so exceptional that the audience finds them out.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I think it's so important that we continue to provide quality both in commercial and non-commercial television, because that becomes a process of education too, and it helps to create an audience for even more daring and more provocative things. I think that picket fences couldn't exist without Twin Peaks having gone before it and other programs having been daring and gone before it. And so when we put on quality programs on commercial television and non-commercial TV, I do believe it creates a hunger within the audience. I mean, sometimes you succeed, sometimes they're not successful. I mean, we talked earlier about a program like The Singing Detective, which was quite inventive. It was terrific to me that one of the networks would then try Cop Rock, which didn't succeed. But again, I think that kind of creativity is a positive thing. And in the same way that we have all, there was one point years ago when many of us would never, a Latin American novel was something we didn't know of. The writers from Latin America, the group of people this large, we'd barely be able to name two. And then suddenly when we get exposed to somebody like Garcia Marquez or others, it creates a hunger for others too, and we began to know more and more. So I do think that we have that kind of responsibility. I mean, the success of a series like Eyes on the Prize on public television helped to create a hunger for a program like the Civil War. The Civil War then makes possible on network a program like Lincoln. And I do think that continues, and so that's a process that we should have, and that I do believe that it helps to give an identity, a personality to television that is part of what we then come to TV for.
Excellent. Good. In the balcony, please.
Yes, my question, which...
Name?
Oh, my name is Paul Johnson. I'm an independent producer. I'm concerned with who are we making the decisions about our programming in the 500 channel world that we've been talking about. I haven't heard anyone discuss this thoroughly. What I'm concerned about is like 95% of other independent producers, there's very little hope that our programs will get on TV, including PBS, while we watch PBS show the same shows over and over again, at least here locally. I have a dream that with 500 channel television, someday my shows might get on the air. But you know what? I don't think so, because I'm also a subscriber to the two industry periodicals, multi-channel news and cable news, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And just last week, there was an article.
You do have a question.
My question is this. In the 500 channel universe we're talking about, does anybody really believe that there will be any more diversity? In the last article that was in cable news, the president of the Discovery and Learning Channel proposed a program where in the 500 channel universe, 100 channels will be used up to play the top 10 movies every 10 minutes. The next 100 channels will be used to play the top 10 broadcast shows on the networks. So I'm looking at more is less. More stations means less diversity. Can you please address that?
I think you just answered your question.
My question is, what do you think about that? That's the most important question here tonight.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Tom Wicker, I haven't heard from you in a while. Come on.
Well, since he already answered his own question,
yes, he did.
Go ahead and...
Well, I don't think I did.
All right.
Well, I thought you said you did. I have in any case, I can't answer this question because I don't know who will be making those decisions. But as I've listened to the conversation here tonight and the things that have been said, two things seem to me that I don't want to be too much of a dog in the manger, but it seems to me that there's a suggestion in what we're hearing that we have got choices that we can really control what's going to happen technologically. I don't think that's history doesn't show that. I mean, technology has a kind of an inevitability about it. The only deliberate decision I can remember in my lifetime where people turned down technology was when the U.S. government decided not to build the SST. In other words, technology just goes ahead, and so I think it's going to go ahead here in that sense. And I don't believe that we've got that much control over it. There may be some control over timing and so forth, but technology takes on its own force. I think that's one thing. The other thing, and I don't want to be insulting to anybody, but I think there's an assumption here that a lot of things are being described as good and even as great that most of us don't think are good or great, and certainly not great. With all due respect to people on television, with all who control television, and with all the obvious problems that they have, and I understand some of those, I just think that you can almost name on the fingers of your two hands, and you've named some of them, the really rather merit-worthy programs that have been on television in the last in the last several years, and that's not a very good record. So I'm not saying that you don't have problems, or I'm not even saying you could do better, but I'm simply saying that I don't think that a lot of what we get now should be described as great and probably not even as good.
Is the explanation possibly, I direct this to Michael Fuchs, is the explanation possibly that the money is not there to produce those wonderful programs?
No, I don't think it's money. I think cable has shown it's not money. I mean, some of the best things we ever did in our history were low-budget, comedy type of things. It's not money.
It's what?
I think money is going to have to do with the speed of technology. I think what Tom says, there is an inevitability of technology, but you know, I think Al Gore said the other day, I think the government should build the telecommunications superhighway. I mean, you know, this is a big ticket item we're talking about. You know, why isn't there more quality? I mean, first of all, everyone's a television programmer. Everyone in this audience thinks they know what's good and what's not good, and it's enormously subjective. The process is very difficult. I hardly know anything else from a manufacturing point of view that is as difficult as putting together something that touches so many people, something that is classic. It's very difficult. It's more collaborative than almost anything else we do in society. There's so many things that go wrong. And I think I would debate Tom privately. I'd list a hell of a lot of good television, including on my own channel. Now, he may not like it, and it may not be to his liking, but you know, it's stuff that has touched people, that has made a difference. You know, it is, I think cumulatively, television does, if you look for diversity, look what's happened in the last 10 years. Look what we had 10, 15 years ago, 3 channels, 6 channels, whatever it was. I mean, look what's available out there right now. If you want a lot of choice, you can watch every movie. Get a satellite dish and you can see everything. And there's a lot of good television that's created, but I'll just tell one fast story. This is no different than what's happened to other industries in this country. Certainly look what's happened to our automobile industry. In the old days, if you looked at the Show of Shows, which people still call one of the great classic comedies on air, the writers on that show were Woody Allen, Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, Larry Gelbart, and I'm not even scratching the surface. Today, the appetite, whether it's the economics, is so great that if that show was on the air today, every one of those guys after 2 episodes would have their own deal and their own show. So instead of having a writing team that's made up of Neil Simon and Woody Allen and the greatest writers of a generation, each one of these guys would be a producer-writer doing his own show. You'd have 15 mediocre shows instead of 1 great show because we have 15 times the appetite. That is America. What has happened to this business is no different than what's happened to a lot of other businesses, but we're more visible and you all feel more personally involved in our business. If the 3 guys from Detroit came here today, to talk about the changes in the American automobile industry, I don't think we'd have this same kind of interactivity. But television, you talk about politicians. They go to run for office, and someone says to them, what's going to happen with my satellite signal? I mean, is that the biggest priority in this country right now? But that's what television is here. So everyone's got an opinion on television. We'll never be as good as what everyone thinks. And yet the audience sits there, and maybe it's biological, psychological. It's a passive activity. Your brain half goes to sleep when you're watching television. All of you act here like you're going to watch the Mayan civilization, and then you switch to Geraldo Rivera. You know, we got the numbers. Now, do we have to pander to that? No. And diversity allows us not to pander, and some of us do it pander less than others. But let me tell you, you're part of this process, and I know in this room is not our typical audience. And I think the large corporations and the advertisers have a lot to do with it. No one talks about that. These guys, I mean, when big corporations say we don't want the issues of America dramatized, I'm not going to advertise on a show about abortion. That issue tore this country apart. I put an abortion movie on. I don't need a sponsor, but Jeff can't. And that's an issue. And I'm not saying it's General Motors' fault and not Jeff Sieganski's fault, but we're not the only ones there. This is a more complicated process.
Could I say something there? Because it seems to me that, I mean, I think this audience understands the problems that you're talking about and the reasons, let's say, that you don't do or do certain things. I think we understand that. But, and I'm not particularly saying that you could change it. But when you say, for example, we've got the numbers, we know you don't watch the Mayan thing, you watch Geraldo or whatever, we've got the numbers. That's a primitive form of the electronic town meeting. And so I think what is happening here is that we are coming to that kind of thing. We're coming to, I said politically, we're coming to the electronic town meeting. We're a lot closer to it than perhaps this audience realizes. And I think you're already there in television. And if that's the case, then we can't really hope for extraordinary television. We might hope for extraordinary sitcoms, which is certainly better than bad sitcoms by a hell of a long shot.
Tom, extraordinary television can work. I mean, we make it sound like good people don't want to watch good television.
Well, I mean, think you've just said they didn't. You said they
no,
cut
no,
off
no,
the back of civilization.
No, I say, listen, I mean, that's very specialized programming. I don't expect that the Mayan civilization is going to be mainstream, but you can make wonderful television. And you know, I don't care if it's MASH or whatever Jeff cited, or you know, I'll give you an example. We did a show called Tanner that was the smartest political comedy, political satire. I mean, I think the Dukakis people copied that show, which is why they did so bad. He out-Tannered Tanner 4 years ago. And we couldn't find an audience for that show. And we've been trying for years to be able to handle the American political issues in a sort of entertaining way, but a realistic way. That show was very realistic. So we try, we don't program for ourselves. We don't get an audience, we go, and then we try something else.
Mr. Fuchs, I'm trying to say, it seems to me you said good television can work, but when we put it on, we don't get any audience.
Not all.
Seems to me you're proving the case of the critics.
Well, it's not all the time. And I think Jeff's question about this interactivity, 500 channels that can't be promoted. Americans have to be told what's out there, what's good, particularly as it gets, you know, to put on something good that no one knows is there, there's no economic system that's going to support that. Sometimes good things work, and there has been good television, and sometimes it doesn't work, and you go back. Listen, there are movies that get discovered 30 years later as being terrific movies that just didn't find an audience at that time. This is a mysterious business.
Before we go to the next question right here, just out of curiosity, Jeff, and not really to lean on you in any way, but when Michael was just mentioning a moment ago that there are major public policy issues that are not addressed on television because the sponsor will not allow you to do that. Now, just out of curiosity, is that a factual statement? Do sponsors literally come to you and say, Sieganski, we can't deal with abortion?
Well, they're not quite that, they aren't quite that blunt, but the effect is the same. You know, I had one major advertiser, in fact, this is the second largest advertiser in the United States, I'm not going to say who it is, but you can all guess, who said to me that he wanted to sponsor topical shows about problems of today. He just did not want it to be controversial. Well, that, you know, limits the... And in fact, you know, Michael, you know, just mentioned about the abortion. We did an abortion movie last year, and we had massive advertiser dropout. We still went ahead and did it because, you know, contrary to what you know, Tom seems to think, we do try to do quality programming, whether it returns or not at times. In the end, though, particularly in series programming, it has to, we have to get a return on it because it's just, we can't hemorrhage millions of dollars. But we do a lot of controversial programming. But yeah, we have massive advertiser problems, and we've always had it. But maybe now more than ever because of all the special interest groups that write those advertisers when they have an ad in the show and say that they're never going to buy their product again.
We've got 5 minutes to go. Question here on the floor, please.
My name is Dennis Lopez, and I'm a doctoral student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And my question is in the context of seeing the medium of television, hopefully, as a medium that can engender some genuine understanding and compassion among human beings in a very stratified society that we have here in the United States. And to give you an example, my question is, why is it that when we hear, for example, about Zoe Baird and her we're having to pull out of the consideration for Attorney General, that, well, appropriately we hear about the issue of child care. That's not covered enough. But I also represent a group of consumers, very loyal consumers, the Chicano Latino population here in the United States. And we see this issue also as an issue of the presence of undocumented immigrants who have a profound economic benefit to this country. And yet, whether it be news coverage or whether it be topical matters in some sort of entertainment show, we don't get a level of understanding, we don't get a level of genuine consideration of this issue, which is a human rights issue, which affects the Chicano Latino community, as an example.
And your question then is, why is this the case? That's what you're getting.
And just please take note that we're out there. We see very little of ourselves reflected in any type of programming.
Okay. Jennifer, would you like to try to answer that?
Well, I do think that that's a problem that continues to exist throughout all of the media, and I would, you know, I think that that public television included, where that we must have more diversity among ourselves, and so that we then have a greater sensitivity when as we carry stories, we understand more how it affects the people in our population, and I just think that that's a very necessary part of what must happen within the media, not only on the staff and management level, but also on the boards as well.
Our last question in the balcony, please.
I'm Dan Hull. I'm a software consultant and designer. And my questions go to
Your questions?
2 questions. Just
You've got
two.
about 3 minutes, please.
Questions, not speeches. They go to pandering and the effect on the shape of television of the fractionation of the market. Basically, the question 1 is, how much pressure do you people feel yourselves under to break down the boundaries between the show and the advertising? Do you find that the people skipping the advertisements, or if you could imagine that there was a home device that could detect the advertisements and make them into a little picture in a picture and show you something else, would you be pressured in the direction of encapsulating the advertisement?
We've got a problem on time.
Okay.
Please ask your question.
That's one question.
All right, no, that'll do just fine. That'll do just fine.
Okay.
Really.
The other one's more interesting.
Go ahead, you beat me.
If the market broke up so it was like a book market, where in effect a television program was created with encapsulated advertising, and you sold the advertising to someone, and they just had experts to advise them on the market share that program would eventually attain in order to decide whether to front the money. So there wasn't any programming. Essentially, it was pure market-driven shaping of what was produced, what would be produced.
Infomercials.
Infomercials.
That's right. Look, as to the first question, you know, we have very, very strict guidelines about the blurring of ads and programs. We've done a lot of study about zapping of commercials, but the fact of the matter is that advertisers, at least thus far, seem to be able to pay $900,000 for a 30-second commercial in the Super Bowl, and they apparently don't think it's a big enough problem. Although, we know what goes on. To what extent, it hasn't been documented.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I know that you could have been home watching television tonight, but you came here, and I want to thank you all for being a marvelous audience. I want to thank our panel, Jennifer Lawson, and all of our gentlemen, and thank you all.